Welcome to today's Skill Up series session. My name is Emily Spranger. I'm a graduate learning specialist in the Academic Training Academy, and we're very excited to be able to partner with Dr. Linda Bloomberg on her amazing qualitative knowledge and her expertise in this field. Tonight, Dr. Bloomberg will be talking about alignment plus ethics equals rigor. A couple of very brief housekeeping items. We absolutely want you to have conversation in the chat. We welcome that. And Dr. Bloomberg welcomes questions. So if you would like to put your questions in the Q&A, she frequently pauses throughout her sessions to address any questions you may have. So please, we welcome that. I will provide a recording of this session to all of our registered participants and any supplemental materials that Dr. Bloomberg provides me. So if you'd like to have closed caption scrolling based off of your viewer preference, you are welcome to enable that in your Zoom. And without further ado, Dr. Bloomberg, I'm going to pass this right on over to you.
Thank you. Thanks to you, Emily, and to the Graduate Studies Support Center for all of these resources that you offer and that you host for all of our students and our faculty. I'm so happy that Amanda is here today as well, because the library is also, along with ASC and CTL, one of our amazing resources here for our students. And I'm always happy to share what I know about qualitative research. And today's presentation is on two key aspects of qualitative research that make for rigorous research. And these are alignment and ethics, because they actually go hand in hand in some ways, and in some ways they're very different, but they complement each other and they really contribute to a rigorous study, whether it's qualitative or quantitative. So that's really important to bear in mind. In fact, a lot of what I'm going to be speaking about here today, even though it's highly specific to qualitative research, much of it applies to quantitative and mixed methods as well. So here we go. And again, as you said, Emily, I'm going to be stopping at various points along the way for questions and answers. And I will also pause at the end so we can have a discussion. So if you will just gather all the questions that come up in the chat as we move along, then I can address them when I stop at those particular points. So welcome everybody as well. I know that there are some faculty on the call as well as some of our students, and I really appreciate all of your time, taking the time out of your busy days to attend these webinars and to try and plan and learn and gather information and add to your knowledge and to your toolkits so that you can be successful ultimately. And remember, research really is about planning. It's a lot about planning. It's a lot about thinking about key concepts and key issues so that ultimately we can put it all together and conduct a study that is worthwhile and something that we can be really proud of. So as you know, research is multifaceted. We can choose qualitative, we can choose quantitative, we can choose mixed methods. There are many different ways to conduct a study, and these are all things that you will be thinking about in your research courses leading up to the dissertation courses, and then really deciding on what the best approach is or what the best methodology is for your specific problem, purpose, and research questions. So today's webinar has a couple of different objectives in mind, and these are what I would like you to be thinking about as you listen to this and as you think more deeply about some of the concepts that I raise here. The first is developing a qualitative mindset. The second is understanding the idea of the qualitative researcher as the instrument, which is a key concept in qualitative research. And that one really does not apply to quantitative. It's very, very specific to qualitative research. Next is to develop a clear understanding of the concept of alignment in qualitative research. I'd like to clarify the three core principles of the Belmont Report, which are respect, beneficence, and justice. These are the key essence of what makes for an ethical study, and these will apply to quantitative or mixed method studies as well. I'd like to address the concepts of researcher power and positionality, and this relates to the idea of the qualitative researcher as instrument, and you'll see the connection as I move through this. Also, I'd like us to walk away with a better understanding of ways to ensure the hierarchical structures that are inherent in the research process. And I know this sounds a little bit abstract and esoteric right now to many people, but as we listen to what I have prepared here today, it'll become more evident to you. So to ensure that these hierarchical power structures that are inherent in the process do not diminish or undermine the trustworthiness and ethical standards of the research. And again, this would apply to all different types of methodologies, qualitative, quantitative, and mixed methods. And then finally, to understand the criticality and the centrality of ongoing researcher reflexivity, bearing in mind that the researcher themselves is the instrument of data collection and data analysis. And again, this will become much more evident to you as we move forward. So let's take a look at the essence of qualitative research. And this is just kind of like a recap and a revise, because many people are aware of this already, having started their studies. And some people who are at the beginning of the process may find this useful. So qualitative research really is about the collection, analysis, and interpretation of narrative and visual data to provide insight into a particular phenomenon of interest. That's your study's problem. A goal is the description, understanding, interpretation, and communication of your research. As I said previously, the researcher is the primary instrument for data collection and data analysis, and that's how we refer to the researcher as instrument. And the strongest influence on the research process, including all the impact and effects that we have on our participants, our research participants, and the outcomes of the study altogether, start and end with the researcher. So you can see the point I'm trying to drive home is that with qualitative research, because we're not making use of statistical procedures, but rather relying on the researcher themselves as the instrument of data collection and data analysis, the researcher is front and center in the study. And that is why alignment and ethics are so important to consider if we want to produce a rigorous study, which we do. So there you have it, the researcher as instrument. I know I'm going to keep on hammering away at this, but it really is very important. So let's look at the first objective that I had set for today's webinar, and that was to develop a qualitative mindset. The researcher, it should be understood, is part of the social world, not outside of it, because most often we as the researcher in our studies are studying the other. We are studying other people, other situations, unless, of course, we are conducting an autoethnography, which is an ethnographic study on ourselves and our own experiences. We are doing research with other people. In qualitative research, we don't like to refer to doing research on people. That's more of a quantitative term. We prefer to say doing research with people. It's actually more respectful, more inclusive, and more in line with the goals and narrative of qualitative inquiry. Qualitative research has changed how researchers think about and act on issues, including subjectivity, objectivity, interpretation, and representation. And you'll see how all of this plays out in today's webinar. Ways to ensure that the hierarchical structures inherent in the research process do not diminish or undermine trustworthiness and ethical standards is increasingly important in qualitative research. There's an increasingly high focus on conducting ethical and credible research, as you will see as we move forward. And so the transparency of the researcher themselves profoundly shapes the trustworthiness of the research. The more transparent and open a researcher is about the ways in which the research was conducted, the ways in which the research was actually even conceptualized before it was conducted, and the way the findings are analyzed, interpreted, and reported, really do shape the trustworthiness of the research. And remember, we want our research to be considered trustworthy. So let's start with the first concept that I have here for today. Remember, alignment and ethics were the two things that I was going to be looking at. And so the first is alignment. So let's define alignment. I'm just going to read a quote here just to make it simple from my 5th edition of my book, and where I say, your dissertation is a multifaceted product that should demonstrate that you are capable of conceptualizing, managing, conducting, and presenting a rigorous and comprehensive qualitative research study. Of importance, your final product should also indicate and provide clear evidence that you have addressed alignment at every step of the process, and that all the key pieces of the larger whole are congruent and fit with each other. So that's the definition of alignment. Let's now take a look at achieving alignment. Okay, so again, this is a quote from our book. Ensuring that you have achieved alignment among all the key components and elements means that your study is tight in terms of methodological integrity. Methodological integrity is essential at both a philosophical and practical level and is an indication of a study of worth and high quality. Now, when I refer to alignment, and one can read more about this in my book, there's in fact an entire chapter, I think it's chapter 4, that is devoted to alignment. Alignment is not just about your research problem and the research design. It's much more than that, as you can see here. It's also about the research problem and the research methodology and the research methods. Remember, the methodology is your approach, being qualitative or quantitative or mixed methods. Your research methods are your methods that you use to gather data and to analyze data. So there's that difference between the two terms, methodology and methods. Alignment must also be present among the research problem and the research purpose and the research questions, the research problem and the literature review and the conceptual or theoretical framework, the theoretical or conceptual framework, the research questions and the research findings. As you can see, this goes down and down and down, where each aspect has to be aligned with each of the others. So in the end, everything has to be aligned. We also look at the research design, the research findings and data analysis, the research findings, interpretations, and conclusions. And finally, your conclusions and recommendations have to be aligned with each other. So if you look at this, as I say, each level goes further and further deeper into this whole concept of alignment, but ultimately you can go really up the ladder as well so that everything is aligned. And finally, I just want to say that when one finally checks after your DP has been, not even finalized, but when you're busy on your DP, and then again, when you're busy on your DM, your dissertation manuscript, checking for alignment using all of these different pointers and all of these different markers should provide you with a good idea of whether your study is well aligned or not. So let's start with the problem and the purpose. Qualitative research includes a variety of research designs, which are also referred to as traditions or genres. Each of the designs is informed by particular values and assumptions. And when I refer to designs or genres or traditions, here I'm referring to, for example, case study, narrative inquiry, phenomenology, grounded theory, action research, and ethnography. So these are all the main qualitative research designs, and all of these have to be aligned with your research problems. In other words, once you've got a research problem, you would then choose a design that matches with that problem. And that is what I mean by alignment at this level. Next, you have to align the methodology and your methods. So as I said previously, and I won't read this again, the methodology is your overall approach and your design, whereas the methods are the ways that you collect the tools that you use to collect data and then analyze data. So these are called the data collection methods and the data analysis methods. And before any data is collected, you have to make sure that your study is aligned with your actual research questions and your problem. And then finally, do the methods that you have selected align with that design and problem and research questions? So again, you can see multiple levels that have to be taken into account when you're considering whether your study is well aligned. And again, alignment means rigor. So a well-aligned study is a rigorous study, and rigor is the highest quality that one can achieve in qualitative research, because a rigorous study is considered believable and credible and trustworthy. And even though there are always questions about a study, about why did you not do it this way? Why did you choose that approach? Or why did you use that method? Or why did you analyze your data this way or that way? But that does not detract from the rigor of the study if you have a clearly defined outline, and if you as a researcher are transparent about every step you took, and you can answer all of these questions logically, because these are kind of the questions that come up in a dissertation defense. So if you as a researcher are very, very clear about why you made specific choices at each point of the study, then you're covered. And if you can explain it articulately, then you've achieved your purpose. Next, we also have to look at whether the findings, conclusions, and recommendations are aligned. Firstly, the findings and interpretation form the basis for drawing your trustworthy conclusions. Each conclusion should be tied to a finding, and the conclusions are the springboard for developing actionable and doable recommendations. In my book, I actually have a matrix that I've used in every single edition of my book, from the first to the fifth edition, and it's called the if, then, therefore, thus matrix. And this really is a matrix that when you plug your information into this matrix, then it should give you a very clear idea of where you are aligned and where there is still some question, and how you can do better to make your study better aligned. So I'd highly urge you to take a look at this matrix. It really is very helpful. So I'm going to stop there for a moment, Emily, because before we move on to the second part, which are the ethics, I'd like to take any questions that may have popped up about alignment.
Yes. I'm going to go ahead and give just a moment. Again, we did have several participants join after our introduction. So if there are questions, you're welcome to put them in the chat or the Q&A. I was wondering if you could, if you don't mind, if you can expand a little bit more on that matrix, just saying that one more time for achieving alignment.
Okay, I'm going to just go back to that slide if I can. It's called the if, then, therefore, thus matrix. And in the fifth edition, it's in all the editions. I'm not sure what page it's on,
Okay.
but it can be accessed through the book's table of contents. It's one of the tables. And it really is something, it's a practical tool that you can actually copy and paste the matrix and then plug your own dissertation's information into it. And this will then show you that if I do this, then I do this, therefore this happens thus. And that's how it works. And that really is a kind of like the logical flow of checking for alignment. So yeah, please feel free to access the book. I know that it is in the library. And actually, this is just a little thing that I just want to mention, that for all of the boot camps going forward, I am going to be donating a copy of my book to one lucky raffle winner. And we did have a lucky raffle winner at the Atlanta boot camp last week. And it's my honor to do that for our NU students.
I love that. That's so great. I love that. Super fun. Okay, thank you for diving into a little bit more. If any participant does have another question on alignment, don't hesitate to ask it. We'll be happy to address it at the next break.
Okay, perfect. So everybody, please feel free, as you're thinking about things, jot down your thoughts or send it into Emily in the chat, and I will try and get to all of the questions when I stop next, and then again at the end. So we've covered now alignment, which is the first big idea in this whole concept of rigor, and I'm now going to be moving on to ethics. Again, I have done separate webinars here at NU on alignment and ethics, and all of these Emily has can direct people to where these are located, and you can download them and watch them again. So this webinar is kind of like bringing together a number of ideas that I have already discussed in greater detail on their own. So let us define ethics. I just have to move all of the photographs of us out of the way. So ethics is derived from the Greek word ethos, which means character. And ethics involves morality, integrity, fairness, and truthfulness. Morality is about knowing what is right and wrong. And integrity is about acting on what we know to be right or wrong, right? I'm happy to engage in discussion on these issues at another time, because this is a whole discussion in itself. But really, I think that is really what it's all about. That integrity is about acting on what we know to be true, or what we know to be correct or right, and the difference between right and wrong in our minds. And ethics of the utmost importance, so that our research is not harmful to our research participants and the research site. And that is the bottom line of ethics. And I'm going to discuss how the ethics came about in a few minutes, but I just want to quickly define research ethics from these authors, Privatera and Algum Delzel, in 2019, because I think that they had a pretty good definition of research ethics. And I've also used this definition in my book. The term research ethics is used to identify the actions that a researcher must take to conduct responsible and moral research. Engaging in responsible research requires a researcher to anticipate what might happen and to react to what is happening and reflect on what did happen. Researchers must be aware of how a study would affect others in a positive or negative way. So this gives us a lot to think about. It's not just about the negatives, it's also about the positives that we have to focus on. Like, what value did my research bring? Or did it bring any value at all? How does it help the research participants, or how does it help society at large? These are some of the questions that we really should be asking ourselves, so that our research is, in essence, meaningful. Nobody, I'm imagining, would want to conduct research just for the sake of it. You want to conduct research that is going to be beneficial and meaningful to society, to your community, to your organization, to yourself, and also to your research participants. So remember that our research participants, and I want to make this very clear because this is really where I come from. Our research participants are gracious enough to participate in our studies. They don't have to. And we know that because there is no force in asking people, or there's no coercion, and there should never be. And this is part of research ethics as well, which is clearly defined in the Belmont report that we're going to get to in a moment. But our research participants are giving up their time and also giving of themselves. They're sharing their experiences with us. Often, these are very private or personal, and sometimes even painful experiences. So we really have to treat our research participants with the utmost respect. And this is where ethics comes in, because research was not always conducted ethically in history. So let's just talk for a moment about ethics in qualitative research. Rigorous research and ethical research are two sides of the same coin and are mutually interdependent. So this is really going back to the very title of today's presentation, where alignment as one thing, but ethics as the second, is in fact something that contributes very much to rigorous research. Ethics is concerned with the shared principles that qualitative researchers must uphold to guide our interactions with our research participants. Ethics addresses the protection of human participants in our research, including issues of confidentiality, privacy, anonymity, advocacy, and human dignity. And qualitative research is about sharing, respecting, and most importantly, authentically and ethically representing diverse voices. And I just want to read that again, because really this for me is it about our research. Qualitative research is about sharing, respecting, and most importantly, authentically and ethically representing diverse voices. In fact, at the moment, I'm busy on a new book for Sage Publications, which is called 101 Nuggets on How to Prepare for a Qualitative Dissertation. And the focus of this book really is on the ethical aspect of research, because this has become a very much more focused area, especially since the pandemic, when a lot of inequities in research and education were uncovered. And so conducting ethical research, which is very much highlighted in the 5th edition of my book, more so than it was in the previous 4 editions, and it's going to be a key component of my new book, The 101 Nuggets. So be on the lookout for that one. Okay, so let's go now
Dr.
to
Bloomberg,
yes,
I hate to interrupt you, but it has to do with what you're just talking about. Can you please explain a little bit more about authentically representing diverse voices? What do you mean by
I'm going to
that?
be getting to that a little bit further, but but hold on, I'm going to answer it now too, maybe just briefly. Because our participants are, as I say, gracious enough to be part of our studies, and generally research participants can come from any walk of life. We don't know who's participating in our study, although in qualitative research, we do handpick who participates. So that's another key issue that I'm going to be coming to over here, which has to do with ethics. Who do we include and who are we excluding? That's a key point to consider when it comes to ethics. Another key point is that once we've created our sample, conducted our interviews, focus groups, whatever we're doing to collect our data, we're then sitting with a huge amount of transcripts that we are then analyzing and interpreting. And representation is really about this. It's about how do we represent our research participants' voices authentically, so that we really tell the story as they told it to us, and we don't put our own twist on it. I hope that explains, Emily, what the question that you raised about representing voices authentically, with compassion and ethically.
Yes,
and
thank
I
you.
get very passionate when I talk about this, because qualitative research can go awry. Any research can go awry if the researcher has not got their focus 100% on ethics. because this is not about us. It's about our research participants and respecting their voices. So I hope that kind of explains, and we're going to be getting to it a little bit in other places. You're going to see this keeps on weaving throughout everything that we do as researchers. Anything else for right now?
No, thank you so much, though.
Okay. So a lot of research ethics stems from the Belmont Report that was published in 1979 by the National Commission of Protection for the Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Research. And this report was produced because a lot of research had in the past been conducted unethically, where people had been forced to participate in research studies. The research studies were done with an agenda in mind to show up certain things in society that a researcher or an institution believed to be true. And this is really not acceptable at all in today's world. So the Belmont Report really protects our human research participants in terms of three key areas: respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. And I'm going to be going through each of these separately. And each researcher needs to think very clearly about all of these ethical standards and explain in your dissertation how your study will address these standards. This is a critical component of a rigorous study, that you do have to be able to explain how and why you conducted all of the research at every single point and how you protected your human participants right from the very beginning, from the time you contacted them to the time you interviewed them to the time you wrote up the findings, interpreted and analyzed, and then represented their voices. So you do want to, in the end, make sure that your study is rigorous in that respect. So going on with the Belmont Report, and there's quite a bit here that I'm going to be explaining because the Belmont Report really is central to ethical research. So respect for persons is the first principle. And this means that research participants must be treated as autonomous agents capable of making informed decisions concerning whether or not to participate. There's no such thing as coercing people into participate. Even if you are the CEO of the company and you want to do research in your company, you cannot mandate that people have to participate in your research. You just cannot do that. It should always be based on informed consent, where people have actually signed a consent agreement to be part of your study. In addition to being capable and informed, all participants must be free of coercion and free of undue influence. In other words, you cannot say, if you participate in my study, I'll give you a raise. If you participate in my study, I'll give you an incentive here at work. You can give participants an incentive. It's not an incentive, but it's a sort of bonus or a gift for participating in your research study. Many researchers will give like a gift card or a small donation, and that is completely acceptable. But making participation contingent on a reward of some sort is not acceptable. Also, people with diminished autonomy, including vulnerable populations such as prisoners, children, pregnant women, and various other sectors of the population, some minority groups as well, which I'm going to get to, are entitled to added protection in research studies. And that is really something we should also be very, very cognizant of, because people with diminished autonomy are more vulnerable, hence they're called vulnerable populations, and they're entitled to additional protection because we never, ever, ever want our research to be harmful in any way, shape, or form, whether it's in the present or in the future. And remember, once you've written up a study, that study can go anywhere. It can be shared with anybody. Research is typically public domain. Once it's published, every dissertation becomes published through ProQuest and anybody can access it. So we do want to make sure that our participants have been treated respectfully, that their identities are not known, and that they have not been coerced in any way. And finally, as the question that Emily raised, their voices are represented authentically and not changed or made to be anything other than what they really are. So respect for persons is the first. The second principle is beneficence. All persons must be treated in an ethical manner by respecting their decisions and protecting them from harm. And we have to make every effort to secure their well-being throughout the research and beyond the research. Beyond goes back to what I've just said, that once your study is published, anything can come of that research. Anybody can read it, use it, share it, do what they want with it. And we don't want any harm to come to any of our research participants in that respect either. And then finally, the third principle is justice. This refers to the fair and equitable treatment of all individuals and groups that are selected for participation in your study. Justice is applied to ensure equality in the selection of potential research participants. Remember, I spoke a little bit about who is selected. You as a researcher in qualitative research, because we're not doing random sampling, as would be the case in quantitative. You're not doing this huge random sampling procedure, but you're conducting what's called purposeful sampling. And so you're deciding based on certain criteria who you want to be in your study. Now, just let that sink in for a minute. What sort of red flags can that raise? What sort of problems can that open up to? Because you're making the decision like, okay, I'll have you, and you, but I won't have you, and you. Like, who says that we have the right to do that? And this is where power and positionality also comes in. And I think you're going to find that very interesting. And also in both in my current book and my new book, I'm focusing very heavily on power and positionality and hierarchical structures that are inherent in the research process, because these really are key concerns in making sure that our research is ethical. I also want to say that an injustice occurs when some people benefit and some people are denied the benefit, or when a burden is unduly imposed. And that'll also become clearer as we move forward. So this is all about justice. So just to recap, I've spoken about the three main principles of the 1979 Belmont Report, being respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. So let's also just look at these three core principles. As outlined in the Belmont Report, all researchers must recognize these three things: informed consent, where people are actually giving their signed consent, or it's called, in the case of minors or people that are under the age of 18, it's called assent. And that's an agreement that is made between the researcher and the person's guardians or custodians. This really isn't very much part of what we do in dissertation research. It requires a much higher level of IRB approval because it's not the actual person themselves that's making the decision. And that really opens it up, the research up to a lot of different issues as well. So let's just go with informed consent, that we're doing research with people that are over the age of 18, that are not vulnerable populations, and that can actually give informed consent themselves. Next is the risk-benefit analysis, and this applies to the researcher's responsibility to minimize all potential risks and maximize potential benefits associated with the research. Remember, you're trying to establish that balance where the risks are minimal and the benefits are maximal. And you do that through careful thinking. This is not something that can be done by AI. It's not something that can be done with a computer. You, the human researcher, the researcher as instrument, has to make these decisions on your own. These are key ethical decisions and key moments in your research that you really have to step up to the plate and do what you consider as the right thing, being moral and ethical. Also, selection of research participants includes issues of justice, where questions may arise regarding all choices, and I've said this before, pertaining to how and why you make the decision to include or exclude certain people from your research. And you're going to also have to answer these questions in your dissertation, in the ethics section, and this could be a dissertation defense question as well. Why did you decide on a research sample which included these 12 people? What made you choose these 12? And really give that some thought to yourself as you are writing and journaling and reflecting on your research, not just at the beginning, not just at the end, but throughout your research. Like, why are you making these decisions? What is causing you to act in a certain way? Challenge your own assumptions, challenge your subjectivities and your inherent biases. We all, as humans, carry implicit biases. Why are we doing this as opposed to that? I just want to say one quick thing also about reflective journaling throughout the process. It really is, A, very helpful to you as you reflect on your own role as the researcher, and B, it's very helpful at the end of the research to go through your journal when you're actually analyzing and writing up your findings, and even at the very end, because I actually invite all of my qualitative students to write a reflection at the end of their dissertation on what the research meant to them. What just exactly that. What did this research mean to you as a human being, as a researcher? What have you come away with? What did you learn? Because we really do learn a huge amount from doing a huge, intense dissertation study. And those of you who haven't reached the end of the process will see this when you get to that point. I know that those faculty that are here today will hopefully agree with me that we come away from our research changed in many respects because we have gone through a very intense process of research, and it really makes us learn a lot about ourselves and our own lives as well. I also want to say that when I work with students and dissertation students, even students in research courses, I learn as much from them as hopefully they're learning from me. I really consider myself to be learning alongside my students, with and from them. And that is something that I've always considered to be important to me. So ethical considerations, ethical principles shape our research approach, including the type of research questions we raise, the choice of the site. Remember again, choosing our sample is one thing. Choosing the research site is another. Why did you choose school A over school B to conduct your research? Why did you do your research in this particular organization? All of these questions are key to understanding the way we conducted our research. Also, the kind of stories we choose to share and those we choose not to tell. Again, as a qualitative researcher, once you have all of your transcripts, it's up to you to share what you want to share. You can leave out huge chunks based on whatever your reasons are. And again, this is something you have to challenge yourself with. Like, why am I choosing to tell this story? And why am I minimizing that story? Another thing I just want to say, and I've come across this a lot in my reading on qualitative research, and a lot of it lately, actually, the silences where people don't speak about something. When they're asked a question in an interview or a focus group, and they either remain silent or they change the subject to some other thing. The silences are often the stories that we need to tell as well. Why do people not want to speak about something? Why do they choose to remain silent? These are part of the beauty of qualitative research, which is not all at the surface, but are some of the hidden gems that we can also talk about. Remember, because we're keeping our participants' identities confidential, we use pseudonyms. We're not divulging their confidences and their confidentiality and their identities and telling the story. So we have to be very, very careful about how we portray these stories in a way that is not going to backfire or come back to haunt any one of our research participants or even ourselves as researchers. We have to live with ourselves and know that we've done our best in telling the story authentically. And remember the implications of all of the choices that we make beyond methodological decisions, like what are my research questions and what design am I going to use and etc. Those more methodological, concrete type choices. The choices that we make in terms of analysis, interpretation, and representation are more critical today than ever before. And that really is just the way of the world today. The sort of the genie's out of the bottle. We've been exposed to new ideas, new realities, whether they're difficult, pretty, ugly, or whatever. The world is as it is today, and we need to take care of ourselves as researchers to make sure that we're doing the best we can under circumstances.
Dr. Bloomberg,
Yes.
a few things have popped up.
Okay, good.
First of all, one question and again, if I need to expand on this, let me know, Lee, but one of the questions in the chat Lee had mentioned, is there a scenario where a very small number can emerge as a risk, or does it depend on the research topic?
A small number in the sample, is that what it means?
Yes.
Qualitative research can be done with one person, like an autoethnography, you're doing research on your own experience. But doing a very, very tiny sample of like 2 or 3 or even 5 people is a little difficult because, firstly, if you're doing it in an organization, say, those people could be easily identified. Also, you're going to get a little bit more of a diverse perspective of voices if you have a slightly larger sample. So I always say go with around 10, 12, even up to 18. But it can be done with smaller numbers. Just remember that there are issues to consider when it's a very small sample, like I've just said.
Yeah, and again, to Lee's additional question on there, again, depending on the research topic, right? So working with your chair to see what is an
Yes, very
appropriate.
much working with your chair, who is your guide and expert throughout the process. Let them guide you as to the research sample. Everybody has a different, not everyone's going to agree with me that it has to be that amount of people. There's also the concept of saturation, which I'm not going to get into in today's webinar. And saturation is when, how do you know when you've collected enough information? Well, the more people you have, the more chance you have of collecting enough information. With a smaller sample, a very, very small one, you're just not going to get the diversity of perspectives, and you also may have a difficult time getting the richness of the data.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bloomberg. And then the other one again, and this is back, this question came in the Q&A when you were discussing ethics, but the question in the chat reads, can our dissertations be embargoed? And I think that has to do with ethical considerations of just, can your dissertation just be stopped at some point?
The IRB has the power to stop any research that they believe is not being conducted ethically. So yes, if you do not, firstly, any research has to get the green light from an IRB. So you have to present all of your materials to the IRB. We have an outstanding IRB here at NU, very, very thorough. And they will go through all of your information that they require. Every student is required to submit the exact same materials.
Mhm.
The IRB will make a determination. They'll go back and say, we still need further information here, or we're not happy with this, or can you please elaborate on this, et cetera, until you finally get approval. Now, once you've got approval, you cannot just go off on your own and do what you want. You have to abide by what the IRB has approved. If you want to make changes to your study, you have to reapply to for an IRB modification. Yeah.
Hold on one second,
but if
Dr. Bloomberg.
Sorry, Emily.
No, so sorry about that. I did ask some follow-up questions just to make sure I was getting the context of being embargoed. I wasn't sure if it would be traded or stopped entirely. So let's try this again. The embargo question is about the ability for the dissertation to be sequestered. Is that a possibility once it becomes public information? Is that a scenario that you're familiar with?
I've never been, yeah. You mean like legally sequestered and
Yeah.
examined? Only in terms of plagiarism, I guess. If there's a plagiarism issue and you've plagiarized from somebody else's materials, then as we've seen in the world right now, these things are happening. But if you've conducted your research ethically, as long as everything's ethical and you've been able to report and show that you've conducted it ethically and that you've abided by the Belmont report and that you've respected the persons, you've addressed justice and beneficence, then that should never occur. I would say that any research study, whether it's a dissertation or any other published research, could only get to a point of being sequestered, if that's the word, is if there is an oversight in terms of plagiarism or lack of ethics. That, in my opinion, and I've never really seen, personally with any of my students, I've never seen this scenario.
And hopefully, Adrian, we were able to get that a little bit more ironed out. If we have a little bit more time at the end, if you want to,
if we have any time at the end, I'd also like to call on some of my colleagues so I can see on this in the webinar
and see if anyone else had,
and see if anyone has anything. Remember, I'm just not the only expert here. And I know my colleagues, many of whom are chairs who are sitting here today and watching, have had also very rich experience in chairing and being subject matter expert for our dissertation students, and I'd love to hear from them as well.
Thank you, Dr. Bloomberg. In the interest of time, let's move forward in the presentation. If there's a little bit more time at the end, let's see if we can expand on that a bit more. I'm going to
try and speed up a little bit here. Vulnerable populations I mentioned before. These are special ethical considerations with respect to people that are not able to make decisions themselves as much as other people are. So these are children, prisoners who don't have the freedoms that we have walking out in the world. And also there are also a lot of ethical concerns, and there's a lot of literature on marginalized or underrepresented groups or populations that may have experienced oppression or marginalization in the past or even currently. So we have to really, when you do research with Indigenous populations, and there's a lot of research on a lot of writing on this, is really interesting information on how we can respect Indigenous cultures again, I write a lot about this in my book, Current and Future, about how we represent different cultures, how we respect other cultural voices. And all of this comes into the vulnerabilities of that some populations are more at risk than others for being misrepresented or oppressed or not treated ethically. So again, I'm sorry to harp on these issues, but it's very much part of where I come from in terms of doing ethical research. Now we're going to get to power and positionality, and I know I'm going to have to speed up a little bit here, and this is really like the very interesting part of things, because the broader social and cultural context is duplicated in the research context. So because we're playing the role of researcher, we can sometimes reproduce the inherent hierarchical power structures that privilege some, silence some, and deny the existence of others. And this goes back to what I said before. We choose who we want to participate, we choose how we want to analyze the data, we choose which stories to tell. And because we are the researcher, we're in a position of power to do so. So we have to be very, very careful about how we make these decisions, and also be available and ready to answer questions about this. To be attentive to issues of diversity, inclusion, and ethics, it's important to highlight the ways that research participants who identify as minorities or underrepresented populations will feel in the ways that they engage with us as the researcher. Remember, all of these hierarchical structures are very subtle, and sometimes they're not so subtle. Sometimes they're in your face and overt, but we have to be aware of them at all times and not kind of sweep it under the carpet and imagine it's not happening. Positionality refers to the researcher's role, social location, and identity with regard to complex relationships within the research process. Researcher positionality can impact all aspects and stages of the research, right from the very beginning, the way we craft the research problem, the sample that we gather, the way we analyze and interpret the findings, etc. And involved in all of this are assumptions, biases, and discriminatory practices even in some ways. And so we have to address power and positionality as central to establishing credible and trustworthy research. Representation, I already spoke about when I answered your question a little earlier, Emily, and I'm just going to read through this again because it's so important. To be attentive to issues of diversity and inclusion, it's important to highlight the ways in which our research participants engage with us as the researcher. We have to think very critically about the way that we're writing up our findings so that we represent the voices and the site authentically. We have to ask ourselves this question: for whom do I speak? Whose voice am I portraying here? To what end am I conducting this research? Ask yourself that very basic question. Why am I choosing to focus on this as my research? And as a researcher, you'll have to consider all of these issues, no matter who or what you're writing about, because it's an ethical responsibility to be transparent about our own assumptions and biases and values that we bring to the research process as human researchers. Remember, again, as I said previously, it's an act of power to analyze and interpret somebody else's reality, somebody else's story. And this is a complex issue to be addressed with transparency and integrity. And it is an ethical responsibility on our part as researchers. And we have to also, at the same time as conducting all of our research, be open to critical feedback and change. So if in discussing our research with colleagues or with other professionals, we really have to be open to their voices in terms of the limitations they may see with our research and ways that we can improve or enhance on some of the drawbacks or limitations that we are faced with. Again, what I just said also throughout is that transparency equals trustworthiness. Neutrality is not considered part of qualitative research. We do not claim to be objective or neutral, as would be the case in quantitative research. Subjectivity is inherent in all aspects of qualitative research because we are human beings as researchers. We have to acknowledge our subjectivities and also be clear to explain how these play out in the process and take account to which our subjectivities can cause harm potentially. The goal is to make our subjectivities as transparent and clear and open as possible. Reflexivity is really just the process of reflecting on our research at all stages, and the research journal is a great way to do this right from the very, very beginning. Reflect on what you bring as a human to the research process. Why am I doing this research in the first place? What value can this bring? Why am I conducting the research in the way that I've chosen to? Why am I choosing this particular research design, be it a case study, a phenomenology, ethnography, narrative inquiry, etc.? Because reflexivity prepare us for the many ethically important moments that will emerge as we conduct and finally write up our studies. So be reflective throughout. And that is, again, why I love to include the reflective component at the end of a dissertation. I also included at the end of all of my books. What did I learn from writing this book? What did I learn from doing this research? It really gives us as the researcher that final closing comment of what we come away with. Because remember, as a researcher, we are like the critical component in the entire process. We are setting up the study, we're deciding on all of these different things. And finally, at the end, what do we learn from it? There's no gain if we haven't learned and come away with new learning, new knowledge, new insights that we can apply in our own personal and professional lives. So remember, again, reflexivity, as I said, is ongoing. It occurs through data collection, data analysis, interpretation, and representation. The reflective journals I mentioned already. And then just reflecting on your study's credibility. I've listed here a number of different questions, which when Emily sends out the presentation tomorrow, I imagine, you can take a look at this slide. There are many questions that you can ask yourself as you move through your research to really get yourself to think more deeply about these critical issues and reflect on them. For example, how does my positionality impact all aspects of my study? Who's being included or excluded and why? What assumptions underlie my data collection? What assumptions underlie my data analysis? So that you can also add your own questions to this. And I really do invite you to, because these are really important, critical moments that will make you think more deeply about the really bare bones of your research and really establish yourself as a credible researcher who is capable of producing a rigorous study. There I said it. I preempted myself. Develop your own questions to challenge your thinking. I forgot that I even had that slide. And just to say, again, thank you so much for taking the time to listen. The material is all drawn from this book, from the 5th edition of Completing Your Qualitative Dissertation, a roadmap from beginning to end, which I have to take accolades to Sage Publications for believing in me all these years and for publishing these 5 editions. These are all the references that I referred to in this presentation, which again, you can take a look at. The Belmont report especially is critical. And I really recommend that all students read it and understand it so that you can actually craft a very ethical study. And here we are with 5 minutes left, and I'm ready for questions.
Great. And I just wanted to expand just a wee bit on that previous question, where we were wondering about sequester or embargo was the initial question in the Q&A. But this particular student is interested to know whether the research has the capacity to kind of hold from publishing or perhaps for a limited amount of time. My understanding is that to graduate as an NU doctoral student, you do submit your dissertation to ProQuest.
Yep. We do submit.
Okay.
All dissertations worldwide are submitted to ProQuest, so that with your abstract and your keywords and your title, any student, any person in the entire world could access your study and read it. And remember, there should be nothing to hide if you've conducted that research ethically, and that your research participants and your research site are not easily identified, so that nobody can come back to any one particular person or even a particular group of people based on what you've studied.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. At what point, Dr. Bloomberg, do you start writing your ethical section in your dissertation? Is there a specific outline to follow to make sure you've included everything you need in the
At
section?
NU, we have the templates for the
Yes.
dissertation and for the ADE, the Applied Doctoral Experience. Each of them has a section on ethics. I'm not sure. I think in section 2 for the applied, and I think it's in chapter 3, methodology for your, or even chapter 1. For the 5-chapter dissertation, but there definitely is. And again, ethics weaves throughout. So even though you're writing that particular section, you're going to come back to discussing these things in your analysis chapter, even in your final reflection. So yes, ethics is critical to your dissertation.
And as Dr. Bloomberg just referenced, whether you're the DSE route for your dissertation or you're the ADE. If you go to your corresponding center, you can utilize the template, and that will help guide you to understand where you should be addressing ethical considerations as well. And then the golden rule, checking back with your chair as well too. So keep that in
Absolutely.
mind.
Remember that you're not alone in the process. So the IRB will do that check initially to give you the go ahead. Your chair will always be looking, your subject matter expert will always be looking, and your academic readers. There are a lot of different eyes on how well you're conducting your study.
Wonderful. Next question, if it's okay. We have a few
Yep.
more minutes.
Yep.
How, let's see. Okay, so this is a question for quantitative research to check if that is ethically correct. You know, is there a checklist for the quantitative research to check if that
I'd like not to answer that question because I don't do a lot of that work. But if the person would check in with the ASC, with the IRB, or even with your chair, there definitely must be quantitative checklists. But a lot of what we've discussed here today would apply to quantitative as well, because ethics is ethics, and the way you conduct research ethically would apply to any research. The Belmont report is not specific to qualitative. It's specific to any research that's conducted with human participants.
And those checks would be assured as well too.
Yeah,
through
for
the
even for
IRB
quantitative,
process.
you'd have to look at justice, respect for persons, and beneficence. It would apply.
Someone is asking about your 101 nuggets. When is that due to be
That'll only
published?
be
Is
at the
it
end
too
of the year.
soon?
Yeah, it's too soon. I will let NU students know about it at the time, but I'm still in the process. It'll be a 2025 edition that'll probably be out in January of next year.
All right, wonderful. And I'm scrolling through the chat. I don't see any other questions.
Do any of our faculty who are here want to say anything about their experiences in working with our dissertation students and research?
Yes, if you are faculty, you are more than welcome to raise your hand, and I will scan briefly to see if there's anyone who wants to say any other qualitative nuggets on ethics and alignment or rigor. All right.
I really hope that I've given everybody some things to think about, and to really take away with you, to reflect on, which is part of what research is all about. Be that reflective researcher. Be that ethical researcher. Be yourself. Be a good human being in conducting your research, with the hope that you will bring about some good in the world, some good in your society, your community, your organization, the lives of others. I mean, be purposeful and meaningful with your research. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity to do a study like this at the dissertation level.
And as always, we are super grateful for our very skilled and talented faculty members that are experts in their respective rights and that are coming to our series to provide their tips, strategies, tools for academic success. Dr. Bloomberg, as always, thank you so much for coming and sharing your knowledge with our students.
Thanks, Emily. And again, thank you to the CTL and everyone that you work with for offering our students these resources. We couldn't do it without you, so thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And until the next time, I hope all of our participants have a great rest of your night and good luck with your research.
Yeah.